Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I am delighted to talk again to Dr. Abdullah Ali. You are most welcome, sir.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here.
Now, Dr. Abdullah Ali is professor of Islamic law and the prophetic tradition at the famous Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California. Now, in the light of the recent leak indicating the US Supreme Court is ready to overturn the Roe versus Wade ruling, this is the constitutional right to an abortion, it might be of great benefit to reiterate the orthodox Sunni position on the circumstances of the permissibility and impermissibility of abortion. As an expert on Islamic law, Dr. Abdullah Ali has kindly agreed today to explain Islam's quite nuanced stance on abortion. So thank you, sir, and over to you.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, this issue of abortion, as we know, is a highly controversial and toxic subject that we see is highly polarizing, in particular in the Western world, where we see generally sort of two camps. Of course, you speak them as the right and the left, or the sort of the religious right as opposed to the secular left, whereas the right generally has this position that abortion should be outlawed, should be illegal, or at least it should be limited to some very particular cases, only allowed in very extreme cases, which actually used to be in the U.S. the same position to an extent that the Democrats used to take, or those on the left, the progressives would take some years ago. But things have gotten extremely out of hand, as we can see. We see certain states completely outlaw all abortions. Like Alabama, for instance, then you have states like New York, which actually permits abortion even up to after birth, or what we call post-birth abortions, which is technically not an abortion, but Islamic law would clearly consider that to be murder. But you see these sort of political reaction, and Muslims, unfortunately, continue to sort of tag along with largely the left, but sometimes we do see some echoes of that on the right as well, right, from Muslims. And so we do know that in Islamic law, that the vast majority of the Muslim scholars are of the view that abortion is unlawful unless under extreme circumstances. And one circumstance which is often spoken about is when the mother's life is being placed at risk due to, of course, the advice of doctors. They say that if this woman gives birth to this child, then she's going to lose her life. And this is not only something dominant in the Sunni tradition. You also see this among the Twelver Shiites, the Zaydi Shiites. You see it among the Ibadis as well, right? That they, and generally the scholars are of the view that abortion should only be allowed, if at all, in a situation wherein a woman's life is being put at risk because of pregnancy. Now, within our tradition, we do have some diversity of opinion, as we know. There's some minority viewpoints as well, allowing for abortion during the first 40 days of the pregnancy. Some allowing it without condition during the first 120 days of the pregnancy. But everyone agrees that after 120 days, that this is the taking of a life, and this itself is murder, and it is unlawful, right? So there are some scholars who even allow it with respect to, illicit intercourse when it happens, like if a woman is guilty of fornication, say, for instance, she's afraid that she's going to be stoned to death, for instance, that she could, there's, extreme minority position that said that she's allowed to actually get an abortion in a situation like that, but there's definitely a lot of nuance, right?
Yeah. Can I just clarify, what is it about the 120-day red line, so to speak, that you mentioned that's so significant? What happens at that point, and what tradition, what scriptural basis is there for this the line that one can't cross? If one does cross it, then one's committing, in effect, murder or killing of an innocent unborn person.
Right. Yeah. This is this particular understanding comes from a famous hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, wherein he mentions that the creation of the human being is being assembled in this mother's womb. And during the first 40 days, it is in one state, and then the next 40 days, another state, and the third, and then the third phase of 40 days. And during that third phase, or after the end of that third phase, at the end of 120 days, we would say, the angel comes and breathes the soul into the actual flesh of that particular, of the child, right? At least this is the popular understanding. This has been the Orthodox understanding for many, many centuries of Islam. There are other narrations of this hadith which give the impression that that the ensoulment actually happens during the first 40 days, right? Because if you, for instance, look into Sahih Imam Muslim, one narration mentions that the angel visits during or after 40 days. One says 42 days, one says 45 days. One just says between 40 and 50 days. You do have different narrations, right? And that it can be interpreted, and some contemporary scholars have interpreted that to mean that the ensoulment happens very early, right? And this itself is consistent with the scientific fact, which has been established today, that the heartbeat of that fetus can be detected between 5.5 and 6 weeks, right? Right. 6 weeks is about 42 days. And one of the hadiths literally says 42 days. But 5.5 or 6 weeks is in that range, right? So the heartbeat can be detected, right, in that particular during that time period. So the 120-day period, it originates from this hadith and the understanding which was taken from scholars historically that at this point the soul is breathed into the body of the child, or this particular flesh which is growing in the womb. Of the woman's womb, and then we know for certain at that point that this is a living human being, and that, and of course, God intends for it to come into the world.
So the crucial thing is whether or not it's 120 days or the earlier the date, but is the ensoulment that is the crucial red line. Once it becomes, at that point, it becomes a person, a human being in the full sense, and is protected by Sharia. Before that, whatever stage it is, it doesn't have that ruah, that spirit from God given by the angel.
Right. Yeah, this is the
red line. Yeah.
Right. So this has been, again, the common understanding amongst Muslim jurists for centuries, that the ensoulment happens at 120 days. However, I think we need to keep in mind that fundamentally scholars who held the viewpoint allowing for abortion prior to 120 days or prior to the first 40 days, that every opinion that allows for abortion is based upon the assumption or the presumption that this is not the taking of a life, right? There's an assumption that this particular growth is a living thing, right? It doesn't have a soul. That's the assumption, right? And I do think that's an important point to consider, in that scholars in that time and for much of Muslim history did not have the tools we have today to know for certainty whether or not there's a living thing inside of this woman, a different organism altogether, right, inside of this woman. And so I do think that there's good reason to believe that if they did have the tools today, then their judgments would have been different, because although they agree that it is murder when it happens after 120 days, they also generally have the viewpoint that it is not permissible to meddle with the process, right? Prior to that, right? So you do have like perhaps one of the most liberal schools on the subject of abortion will be the Hanafi school, at least the traditional positions, the three fundamental positions in the Hanafi school historically, one being that, permissible without condition, one permissible with condition. And I can't remember exactly the third opinion, but at any rate, modern Hanafis, contemporary Hanafis actually are much stricter when it comes to the issue of the stance with regard to abortion, that generally scholars, the Hanafi scholars today, do not allow abortion absolutely. They allow it. In other words, you have to have a reason. You have to have a justification. Say, for instance, if it's discovered that the child may have some extreme birth defects, for instance, you have scholars saying, okay, well, in a situation like that, sure, you can abort the child, right? But the schools overall, their position is that you're not allowed to meddle with the process from the moment, from inception until birth. That to interfere with the process once it has begun is sinful, right? And depending on how far within the pregnancy, the further you get into the pregnancy, the more sinful the act of abortion becomes, right? So that we shouldn't ignore that, right? I think there's a tendency of Muslims to only look at lawful or unlawful, right? We become legalistic, or we conveniently become legalistic at times, right? And other times we're talking about morality and what's moral, what's immoral, but then it's like we get conveniently legalistic when it relates to politics, right? So our position that supports the political party that we stand behind, we say, okay, well, there's a position, an opinion that exists that says this is permissible, therefore it shouldn't be a problem because it's permissible, right? But Islam permits a lot of things, and permitting something, just because something is permitted doesn't mean that you should do it, right? Yeah. So I do think that there is a major disconnect with our community when it comes to, I guess you would say, the metaphysics involved, or the deeper moral implications of.
On that point, if I may just, and I'm not going to mention names here, it's not an ad hominem thing at all, but I have here on my iPhone some tweets from very prominent American Muslim political leaders. And I'm not going to mention their names because that would be ad hominem, and that's not the point. Who have come out very strongly in the last few days, defending Roe versus Wade and defending a woman's right to choose, and articulating the rhetoric that we've come accustomed from the political left in America about this whole subject. So it's a woman's body. She owns her body. It's her right to choose what she does with her body. And the courts and the law, the Supreme Court, should not be in any way threatening that. Now, I mention all this because of what you just said, the metaphysics of this, that Islamically, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't own our bodies absolutely. Everything, including the universe itself, is owned by God. He is the creator and sustainer of all things. So we don't have this absolute right anyway, whatever we're talking about, never mind about abortion. And as you say, that the law is not the end of the conversation. There's the moral, there's the ethical framework as well. And that just seems to be missing, unless I misunderstood it, from a considerable part of the American Muslim public discourse from the Democrat-leaning leaders that I could mention their names, but I'm not going to mention their names. And I find that perplexing. Actually, I don't quite understand why that should be the case. Of all the Abrahamic communities, the Muslims, in my experience, tend to be the least affected by the zeitgeist. Perhaps I'm naive in that respect compared to, say, other groups. But nevertheless, we do have these very left-wing, outspoken Muslim leaders defending to the hilt a woman's right to do what she wants to do with her body. And I find that perplexing. Right.
Well, I think that there are multiple factors that has resulted in this type of leadership or poor leadership that we have. And of course, 9/11 was one of them that, that the U.S. Government, the media apparatus, they really did a major job on the Muslim psyche, and making Muslims feel guilty about anything that seems to be anti-secular, right? And anything opposed to secularism, a secular type of society, or what we would call democracy, et cetera, right? And that's to add on top of the fact that you have many of the people in these leadership positions come from cultures which have been, or the formal colonial sort of subjects of Western countries as well, right? So there's already a sense of a defeatism or a low self-esteem or inferiority complex that exists as well. Then we add on top of this the fact that most of those people in the public sphere who actually are represented or identified as representatives of the Muslim community, that they themselves are not properly educated Islamically, right, in Islamic law or theology. And then those who actually may have some education Islamically or theologically, that they lack an understanding of philosophy and metaphysics, right? And I think that this itself is in some ways is the natural result of Sunnism's difficult relationality and with philosophy, right? And fundamentally what it seems, I would say, has happened is that individuals who are the least prepared and least qualified to be in leadership positions are in leadership positions, right? And while sincere, many of them, they're not as critical as they need to be of the people and the philosophies that they have embraced, knowingly or unknowingly. I would think that most of them have unknowingly embraced a lot of postmodernist type of thinking on things, and it becomes a lot of tribalism as well, right, which we see has been promoted today. So, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us about this, that a time would come where the ulama, or the death or the seizing of the ulama, right, they would be seized, that their lives would be taken, or they would sort of perhaps even be ignored, right? And then people would take ignorant people as their leaders, and they would give fatwa, and they will give fatwa without knowledge, and they will go astray and lead others astray, right? Yeah. So I mean, you probably saw there's a post that I did earlier, or maybe last night, I think it was, where I talked about the easiest way to know someone doesn't know the Sharia, and that usually when you find people saying things like, okay, well, the Sharia has nothing to do with this. The Sharia has nothing to do with the abortion debate, right? And I've seen a number of these people do these type of posts, and that's really what that post originates from, right? And I say, well, no other way to show your ignorance, no better way to show how ignorant you are of the Sharia to make such a claim. The Sharia has something to do with everything. The Sharia has something to say about every act that the human being does, right? And abortion happens to be one of those things. So the Sharia does play a part, right, in this, and there's no way that you can disassociate the Sharia from anything that human beings are involved in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you mentioned the philosophical and metaphysical context. So could you just flesh that out a bit more? What is, okay, we've got the legal situation. We're pretty clear on that. Roe versus Wade being challenged, maybe overturned. It'll go back to the states, to the individual states, to decide whether or not abortion should be permitted. But Islamically, there's much more to it than this. We're looking at a philosophical, metaphysical understanding. Could you perhaps expand on that a bit?
Right. I think that the point where I would start is understanding that the human being is a creature of value in the sight of God, right? First and foremost, that we mean something, right? And the proponents of abortion and population reduction, that they have a different perspective about the human being. For some reason, they seem to believe that the human being is a cancer. The human being is harmful to the earth, right? And the earth could use a far, fewer, number of us, right? And so whatever means is going to lead to that, then they embrace it, right? And they promote it, right? But for Muslims, the human being is special. The human being, to God, the human being is special. The very fact that God ordered the angels to prostrate to Adam, alayhi salam, is one of the greatest proofs of that, right? That God intends for the human being to manage the earth, for the human being to cultivate the earth, for the human being to keep balance in the earth. And the human being is the only one who is capable of doing those things, the only one with the concern for doing those type of things, right? And so when you take a human life, you're actually destroying a potential of a good doer, or the potential of something which God has placed here to create balance in the earth, right? To remove suffering, et cetera, right? And so I think that this is the higher or the aspect of metaphysics. I think this is often missed. There's a reason that after idolatry or associating partners with God, that Imam Ghazali says that the next most serious crime that a person could commit would be to take a human life, right? Right. So when we look at the maqasid, or the objectives of Sharia, that the preservation of religion comes first, according to the majority, but then that's followed by the preservation of bodily integrity, which includes the preservation of life, right? So, but the Sharia also, according to the teachings of our legal system as well, that if there's a clash between the interest of preserving religion and the interest of preserving life, then life is given preference over the preservation of religion, right? So in other words, these are things that are easy to find realistically in our tradition. The Quran goes on and talks about the children of Israel, and that because of Cain and Abel, and one brother killing the other, that it was because of it that God had ordained upon the children of Israel that any person who takes a life for other than murder or for spreading corruption in the earth, then it is as if that person has killed all of humanity. And whoever gives life to a single soul, then, or spares a single life, it is as if that individual is giving life to all humanity, right? So this is that metaphysical framework that is missing in these conversations. And so the question of, okay, is this a child? Am I taking the life of a child, right? When I do this, right? You see, and I think that if we even leave aside the theological and the legal opinions, right, on the question of whether or not abortion should be allowed or not, that if we look at this scientifically, right, if we look at this objectively, right, in a way that if I wanted to, if I ask you a question like, what direction is Mecca from your current location, you're able to tell me, okay, well, it's in this general direction, right? You're able to do that, perhaps even accurately. You can say, specifically in this direction, a straight line here, you will hit the Kaaba. You might be able to do that as well, right? But that is a question of fact, not a question of fiqh or jurisprudence, right? That is really a question of fact, right? Right. And in the same way, when we start talking about these issues, the fundamental question that we need to be asking is when a woman or a doctor aborts a child or aborts a fetus, am I actually taking a life, right? And we can objectively determine that to be true or false, right? If we consider the fact that at about 5.5 or 6 weeks, there's a heartbeat, right? And so as long as we consider the heartbeat to be the greatest sign that an individual is alive, right? Then why would we not say that this is the taking of a life, even if it's prior to 120 days or 40 days, et cetera, right? So that's really, I think, an important aspect of this debate, which has been overlooked because, again, a lot of it is because I think that we don't have the right leaders, like public representatives, and they themselves are not serving the community, they're serving political parties.
Wow, that's quite extraordinary. Well, one of the things that the kind of the background to all of this is this important idea or concept of autonomy, that we as individuals have autonomy. And this is a fundamental right of our existence. Now, this sits particularly with an Islamic conception of our existence and our relationship vis-a-vis God. What would be an Islamic understanding of us as human beings? Presumably, it's not a simple endorsement of this radical idea of individual autonomy, which seems so prevalent. It's just part of the air we breathe in the West, although it wasn't always so. It wasn't always believed to be like that. Of course, it's a recent historical, relatively geographically limited conception, which has become much more global because of the cultural, economic hegemony of certain areas of the world. But nevertheless, it does seem to be a philosophical underpinning of this. Is the person has autonomy and rights, but the Islamic conception is different, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it is, and I think that this idea that freedom or autonomy is the supreme or the penultimate cultural value, right, is what undergirds many of these conversations that we find ourselves involved in. Well, at least it used to be. We used to talk a lot about, of course, freedom. So, for instance, when you think about lesbians and gays, when I was growing up, the people who are gay and lesbian, they didn't argue that, okay, I was born this way. They would say, well, no, listen, I just have I can do whatever I want, right? I have the freedom and autonomy to do whatever I want. Whereas today things have changed, where people are now arguing that, okay, well, this is something biological, right? And then we wax and wane, we sort of shift back and forth and we vacillate about a lot of these issues, and so we start talking about, okay, well, how important is freedom or autonomy, right? And so even Christians historically made a distinction between what they called the freedom for excellence and the freedom for indifference, right? Right. Now, of course, God gives us the freedom to show indifference to his commandments, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And of course, that's one of the things that makes the human being great, that the human being has this freedom. And you couldn't really be a moral agent, right, without having autonomy, right, to do or not do. In other words, you choose to obey God, that you submit to God, right? That's you're a Muslim, Islam means submission, right? So you choose to obey God's commandments, right? But you can also choose to do the opposite, and God allows you to do that, right? But he's not pleased with it, right? He's not pleased with it, right? So, so Islam is concerned with the overall well-being of society, right? Worldwide, right? You see, so for that reason, any freedom that exists should exist in order to make society better. It should exist in order to make an individual, make it possible for a person to excel, to become a better individual, to grow into their humanity, or to complete their humanity. That's fundamentally what the Islamic ideas about freedom are. So in other words, we acknowledge there is, right, a freedom to act indifferently to God's commands. However, God wants us to choose his way, right? And when we don't choose God's way, then we're going to see the type of chaos that we see. And so it's really interesting, too, that when we look at who really wants an abortion, why are they so passionate about it? On one hand, you have it that creates young people. Some of them are very young people. Some of them are, still at birthing age, or people who don't want to live a righteous life. They want to sleep around with whoever they want to. They want like hookup culture, as we call it. You have many people who do that, and then sometimes it happens that, some people may be married. They may want to do it. They may have a reason to do it as well. But generally, that's what we're talking about. People would say, hey, listen, if we are not allowed to get an abortion, which, then we won't be able to hook up the way that we typically do. But, well, it's not completely true, because there are other ways to ensure that you don't get pregnant, right? But again, we're talking about individuals who embrace what we would call indecent and decadent culture, right? That they themselves want that. But then on the other hand, you have certain people who are actually, and it's really interesting seeing this, like people who are in advanced old age, right? There are some of them like women who are, postmenopausal, and then there are men as well who, who you would imagine that they're not interested in having children at their age, who actually are very passionate about this issue, right? To me, I'm saying, well, why do they want it so much, right?
Yeah,
why are you so much in favor of this? Right? Yeah.
So what's the reason? So why would someone sort of answer? What is the reason? Are they just following the left wing hobby horse, or you're suggesting they have own selfish reasons for wanting to?
Yeah. I think part of it is again just following that leftist. What type of horse you said that was?
That's the right expression. But just following the fashionable cause of the moment.
Right. No, I understand what you meant by but it's my first time hearing the expression, so it's okay. Learn new things. No, but basically, I think that for many of them that is the case. To say, hey, well, this is my party. This is the one of the issues that my party champions. But I do think that there's some people who have a much more sinister intention, in trying to promote this type of approach to human existence, right? Or rather, they want to reduce population. I do think that there are some people who are interested in reducing population in any way that they can, and I do that. Abortion is one way to do that, but you also do that through promoting lesbian and homosexual culture by discouraging, people of the opposite sex from cohabiting with one another and reproducing. And you also do it by reducing or changing, causing confusion, gender confusion in society. And there are other ways as well, warfare, disease, things like that. So
the whole complex network of reasons and interests and motivations and people groups kind of together pushing an agenda which is liberalization of abortion. Yeah. One thing I just want to ask about, though, because it's not often covered anymore, is the issue of contraception, because we know in the Roman Catholic Church, artificial is often misunderstood. People think the Catholic Church is against contraception. It's not. It's against artificial contraception. It believes in the regulation of births through a certain, I think, Billings method, where you regulate intercourse so that it doesn't result in children. But it's artificial contraception that is a mortal sin if engaged in with knowledge and full consent and so on. But what is the traditional Sunni Muslim view on artificial or contraception, full stop?
Well, the earliest form of contraception that we know of is what we call what is called coitus interruptus, right? I think that our audience said they would understand what's meant by that. But coitus interruptus was something which was practiced throughout human history. Men often practiced it during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with respect to slave women that they owned. And the Prophet did not condemn it, right? So for that reason, scholars say, okay, well, that this itself, what some call the tanzim an-nasl, or sort of the regulation of one's offspring, right, or the number of one's offspring, is something permissible to do, right? So. Well, with regard to, of course, artificial or contraception or like pills,
because today we've got condoms, we've got artificial contraception, we've got a whole range of things rather than coitus interruptus.
Right. How does condoms? Condoms also. No one has any. No scholar raising the objections to condoms. Right. Most scholars, most schools allow for birth control pills, right? The Malikis are a little bit stricter on this particular matter, this issue, and fundamentally, the idea is that if the particular type of contraception is going to dislodge the sperm from the woman's womb, right, then it seemed to be impermissible, right, to utilize it. Right? But what some of the pills, at least my understanding of the pills, where they work, is that they create a type of protective barrier between the eggs and the sperm itself, right? So it's more so preventing the sperm from reaching the eggs to fertilize them, right? So there shouldn't be good reason to be strongly opposed to them. However, I do think that if Muslims, also with regard to birth control pills, Muslims shouldn't take a very nonchalant attitude about those either, because there are certain dangers that that women are exposed to as well, right? Is in the use of contraception and pills in particular, right? That often women, they develop things like blood clots, and that can put their lives at danger. So it's so in other words, Islam, there's not much enough diversity of legal opinion to accommodate the oral contraception, with the condition that those particular items are not intended, like for instance, the day after pill, for instance, which is somewhat like, abortion on demand, at least in my understanding of it, is that, well, again, the spermatozoa has actually introduced itself into the womb, and
conception has taken place, which is why the Catholic Church are very much against that, because it's not just
right, exactly, right. So so just generally the way that's operated, but again, returning to the question of abortion, and whether or not one is actually harming a living thing, right? And even if one is not harming a living thing, that one is interrupting a process that was started by God, right? And God, when that process begins, is a clear indication that God intends for that particular organism to come into full fruition and to enter into this world, but we interrupt that process, and God is the only one with the right to take life, right? As God gives life, he's the muhyi, and he's at mumit. He's the one who takes life. The human being is not mumit. We are not one who is who can take life. And anytime the human being takes life, it's only because God has authorized it. Right. So we do have those examples, right, in our tradition where God has authorized taking of life. Right. So that's not just simply an independent human decision. Right. So we have to have this understanding that, that God is the one who gives life, and God is one who brings death. And the human being has no right to do so unless God has given authorization to do it.
This theological or theocentric understanding is so fundamental and is so absent from the public discourse, and yet it's so fundamental. And it's just and yet it used to be the understanding, even in Britain and America, in fact, probably everywhere, until relatively recently in history, when suddenly this very militant, secular, non-theistic perspective just took over with all the results we can see in our social fabric today.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll perhaps draw it to a close there. Thank you very much. I mean, did you want to just say anything in conclusion, by the way, on any of these subjects before we perhaps draw to a close?
No, again, I would just reiterate the understanding that the human being means something, right? That we're living in a time where the human being is being told over and over and over in so many different ways that you mean nothing, you are insignificant. As a matter of fact, you are harmful, right? And because of your harm to the environment, your harm to the earth, that you don't really deserve to exist. You're a harm to other species of animals, right? Who you destroyed. That your life is no more valuable than theirs, right? And so you should not have the right to destroy their lives in order to maintain your own, right? Rather, the problem that we have is that we have too many people, right? And people have wreaked havoc on this planet. And even though the human being is insignificant, but again, God believes that we're significant. The Quran reinforces this. And then even the very fact that, and this is probably sound a little bit controversial, the very fact that, many people believe in aliens, we still haven't discovered any, right, speaks strongly about just how special the human being is, right? Right. So because we can theorize, hypothesize all we want, right? But if you are a scientist, right, a scientist can't believe in the existence of other life without evidence of other life existing, but we do in this vast universe, of course. Perhaps there's somewhere in the universe, I think it's a reasonable assumption that there are other creatures throughout the universe. However, it's possible that there are not at the same time, right? So the human being is very special, right? And God has put us here to redeem ourselves, put us here to live out our full potential. And when we are taking one another's lives, when we abandon virtue, when we are not trying to pursue a life that is fulfilling and happy, but in a positive way, which is contributing to the betterment of society, then we are not living for the purpose. We're not living the purpose for which we were created, right? And at least this is what we believe as Muslims. And so abortion is itself a problem, right? Even though we do find those exceptions that certain scholars mention are situations which abortion will be allowed. But at the same time, generally our scholars are of the view that even if you don't believe that this is an actually ensouled organism, right, then it is not possible, not permissible to interfere with the process once it has begun, right? To interfere with that process is sinful. And the later in the process you interfere and intervene, the more your sin increases, right? So it is an important issue. It's not something we can just simply look at it as black or white or just this is some say it's permissible, therefore we can do it, and it's not a big deal. Yes, it is a big deal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who has the right to give life and give death, and not us.
Well, that's so amazing. People sometimes say, well, what has Islam got to offer the West? So it's not a question, it's a rhetorical statement. What has Islam got to offer the West? And I think what you have said is part of a very significant, substantial answer. It offers a nuanced, holistic, life-affirming ethic, which is not just centered on humanity. It's theocentric, so it's aware of its situation within the great scheme of things, that cares for the most vulnerable people in our society, which are often the unborn, of course, not just the poor, the other poor, the marginalized, but the human beings in the womb, who are probably one of the most vulnerable people on earth in terms of vulnerable to abortion. So Islam has a great deal, and this is not a novelty to the West. The West also had many of these values anyway in the past. Sadly, it has abandoned them with great gusto and militancy these days. So Islam perhaps can function as a reminder of these profound truths that were European or Western truths once upon a time, but are actually also universal values. And so I think this whole subject of abortion has thrown this into relief, that this holistic, life-affirming vision of our species and the importance of us as individuals is a great gift that that Islam can give to the West in the future. So,
yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah Ali, for your precious time, as always. And I'm sure viewers will have benefited enormously from your knowledge and your wisdoms and your scholarly expertise. So thank you so much, sir.
Mashallah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Until next time.